Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly break down how Arsenal won the tactical battle in their narrow 1-0 win over Olympiakos in their round of 32 Europa League clash. But when we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have Arsenal in a 4-2-3-1 against Olympiakos, shifting out into a 4-3-3. And when you look at those two systems, they're frankly a bit identical. In that 4-3-3, you have the two shuttlers pushing forward in Bukayo and Kamara. And then when you look at Arsenal, they have the 4-2-3-1 with Guendouzi and Xhaka protecting the back four, and Willock looking to get the ball in advanced positions to feed service into Martinelli, Aubameyang, and Lacazette. But when we start this analysis, we're going to look at how Arsenal were looking to close down Olympiakos from the front. What you end up seeing here is that you have Lacazette up front, and he is tasked with Ba and Ruben Semedo. So you had Willock sitting on Guilherme, and what ends up happening here is that initially it does make sense. If you have Willock stepping into the path of Ba, Lacazette drops off to close down Guilherme. If you have Lacazette pushing out into the path of Ruben Semedo, then you end up seeing Willock maintain his position and close down Guilherme in that deeper role. Nonetheless, there were times where we ended up seeing Arsenal push a bit higher and have Willock step into the path of Ba. And that was based off the fact that we did see Guilherme dropping off to split the two center backs as they were looking to encourage the fullbacks forward. So now you have that 3v2 battle at the back, and what you end up seeing here is that Arsenal wanted to close down all of the three markers to peg Olympiakos back into their half. So you have Willock stepping into the path of Ba, you eventually saw Lacazette shifting into the path of Guilherme, and then you would see Martinelli push forward and close down Ruben Semedo. So if you have those three players marked out of the game, that forces Arsenal's left side to push forward to cover for Martinelli, because you have Aubameyang closing down Tsimikas, and down in that right-hand side, you would be forced to have Saka step into the path of Elabdellaoui, and you would eventually have to see David Luiz shifting out into the path of Masouras. Nonetheless, there were times where Masouras was adopting a wider role ahead of Saka, and if that ended up happening, we would eventually see Xhaka shift over to close down. But if you didn't have Xhaka shifting out into the path of Elabdellaoui, what you would end up seeing there is that you would have Martinelli having to track back to close down the Olympiakos right back if they didn't have an Arsenal playing shifting over when he looked to step to Ruben Semedo. Nonetheless, besides Valbuena's side volley, that forced Leno into a save in the opening minute of that game, and we ended up seeing the key player for Olympiakos in Valbuena starting to get into his rhythm. And it's because of Arsenal's structure in a nutshell. You have Martinelli and you do have Lacazette and Willock pressing from the front, and the midfield battle is set in stone. But when you assess how Olympiakos were able to get into good positions, there was one key theme in their attack, and it ended up seeing the two wider players dropping off to receive the ball. That creates an overload, and essentially it is looking to push the wider players back. Martinelli is renowned for his tracking job, and he did a good job against Elabdellaoui to ensure that there weren't many overloads down that right-hand side. But when you look to the left-hand side, Valbuena did a similar job, and the one issue here was that Tsimikas was able to get beyond Aubameyang, who had difficulties getting back to protect Socrates. So what we often ended up seeing here was that we had Valbuena dropping off to pick up the ball, and then we would have Tsimikas looking to make the overlap, and that's how Olympiakos did get into their better positions. And there was another brief theme that we ended up seeing from Olympiakos that did fluster Arsenal, and what we ended up seeing there was that rather than having Guilherme dropping off to split the center backs, he shifted out into more of a left center back role, and we had Bukayo dropping off a bit deeper to force Willock to close him down. So Willock closes down Bukayo, but then you don't have anyone closing down Guilherme in that left channel role. So that forces Aubameyang to step out to Guilherme, and he simply plays that ball around Aubameyang into the path of Tsimikas. Now you end up having 3v2 down that left channel because you end up having Kamara, Tsimikas, and you also have Valbuena pushing down that left channel, and only Guendouzi can shift over to protect Socrates. However, if Arsenal wanted to avoid that situation, they could simply have Aubameyang track the run of Tsimikas and have Guilherme continue to shift into that zone. Once Guilherme looks to push forward, then you can have Willock shift into his path as he moves central and push Xhaka onto Bukalakis, because simply what you end up doing there is that Guilherme wasn't playing any defensive splitting passes or balls over the top. He simply dropped into that zone to pull Arsenal out of position and get the fullbacks forward. So if you have him look to step forward to try and find those dangerous passes, that's when you can have Willock shift across and then have Xhaka push back into Bukalakis. So when you assess Olympiakos' overall approach in that first half, they were trying to get the fullbacks forward and have the wider players drop off to pull out markers, but they specifically targeted the left-hand side where they could exploit Socrates, and they could exploit the fact that Aubameyang was unwilling to track the run of Tsimikas as he looked to push forward at every opportunity. On the other hand, when we look to Arsenal, their overall attacking structure was as expected. You had Lacazette occupying the center backs. Willock did a very good job of shifting to either side of Guilherme to receive the ball and carry it forward to get his teammates into good positions. You had Martinelli often shifting into a narrow position in between the right back and Ruben Semedo, and that would allow Saka to push forward from left back, because when Arsenal were in possession, we eventually saw them shift into a three-man backline with David Luiz shifting out to the left to cover space for Saka if Arsenal did lose the ball and were attacked in transition. And then you had Socrates not looking to push forward down the right. So Saka once again was given the license to push forward, and Martinelli did adopt those narrow positions to ensure that he had space to attack Elabdellaoui. And then down on that right-hand side, Aubameyang wasn't much of a prominent figure based off the fact that when he did look to get on the ball, he often picked it up in a deeper position on that right-hand zone when he was hugging the touchline. But for the most part, unless it was in transition, he was often going to be tasked to shift into a 1v2 battle. Nonetheless, with Valbuena also not really looking to drop off, it did create chances for Aubameyang to get into those 1v1 situations with Tsimikas, but he didn't test the Olympiakos left back. So even with Arsenal's logical attacking approach, they also encountered issue creating chances and building out of the back, given Olympiakos' contrasting pressing scheme. They also looked to press from the front, and they had El-Arabi looking to step out to David Luiz so he couldn't build attacks from the back, and now they had a decision to make as to who would step out into the path of Mustafi. Kamara did look to push forward to close down the Arsenal right center back, and that does leave Guendouzi free, who was dropping off deeper trying to make it 3v2 in that zone. But what we ended up seeing here was that we had Bukalaki stepping out into the path of Guendouzi, and then we had Masura stepping out to Xhaka. If the ball ended up being shifted out to David Luiz, we would end up seeing Masura step out into the path of Saka, Bukalakis would drop back into the position of Xhaka, and then we would have Kamara drop off into the path of Guendouzi to ensure that they couldn't shift the ball across the pitch into those central areas. So those were the issues that Arsenal encountered in terms of building out of the back, and when you look at the chances that they did create, they often did stem from Olympiakos' mistakes and they were able to break in transition. But even though Lacazette was placed into good positions in transition following Olympiakos' mistakes in midfield, Arsenal's best opportunity in that first half stemmed around the 20th minute mark when they were finally able to make the most of pushing Saka forward and shifting into that three-man backline. What we ended up seeing there was an initial shift from Olympiakos. It was one of the first times that they retreated from pressing, and they dropped off into two banks of four. So they dropped off into two banks of four with Kamara and El-Arabi pushing forward. So with Socrates as a spare man at right center back, you're expecting Valbuena to shift out to close him down, but he's tucked into a narrow position in that midfield bank to ensure that Olympiakos remained compact. That left Aubameyang free in a wider position, and Valbuena was within close proximity in case Aubameyang was put into a position to go 1v1 with Tsimikas. Nonetheless, when you look at that Arsenal chance, it stems with Mustafi splitting Kamara and El-Arabi to find Willock darting into space in between Guilherme and in between Valbuena. When Willock receives the ball, he's able to skip away from both players, and he combines with Lacazette ahead of Ba to play a 1-2 and bypass Bukalakis. He bypasses Bukalakis and he locates Lacazette peeling into that right half space, and he clips the ball over the top into that right half space for Lacazette, with Martinelli darting in between the center backs to break into the 6-yard box. Lacazette's low cross is a bit too heavy, but Martinelli's able to keep it in and to avoid Masura sliding in to try and win the ball back. And when Martinelli's able to get back into play, he pulls the ball back across Ruben Semedo for Lacazette in point-blank range, but he fires his shot instantly inches wide of the net. So in that chance alone, it was clear that Olympiakos couldn't drop off into two banks of four to try and cope with Arsenal pushing forward as they shifted into a back three. It was also unrealistic to expect them to press from the front throughout that 90 minutes. So what they ended up doing was that they shifted off into a 4-5-1. They had Bukalakis and Kamara swap sides in that midfield trio. And when Guendouzi looked to drop off a bit deeper, they would push El-Arabi on top of him. They would have Kamara against Xhaka. And then Bukalakis would be the spare man as the shuttler. But what we would end up seeing there is that Valbuena would sit off a bit narrow and shift over to help out Tsimikas if Aubameyang got on the ball, as he wasn't interested in stepping out to Socrates. But if we had Mustafi and David Luiz pushing forward towards half, that's when we would see the shuttlers look to close them down to ensure that they couldn't play passes in between the Olympiakos midfield. But when we looked at the second half, it was unfortunate that we didn't see a significant tactical shift from either manager. We did end up seeing Olympiakos stick with that 4-5-1 without the ball, and it was very successful in terms of ensuring that Arsenal couldn't get into good positions through that midfield, and eventually it forced Arteta into a change. We ended up seeing Dani Ceballos come on for Martinelli, and Willock shifted out to the left-hand side. It allowed Willock to cut in central and create more space for Saka. Dani Ceballos was supposed to come on to offer guile in that final third and help Arsenal control the tempo of the game. And we also ended up seeing Olympiakos turn to Fortounis for Bukalakis, and it eventually looked like Olympiakos was more of a 4-4-1-1 with Fortounis just in behind El-Arabi. Fortounis did offer a brief spark. We did see him dispossess Dani Ceballos and push forward before he was pulled back, and we ended up seeing him cut across Guendouzi and Xhaka to offer a goal threat, but he fired his shot wide of the net. We ended up seeing both managers turn to the bench once again. We saw Nicolas Pepe come on for Willock, and Aubameyang did swap sides with Pepe so he could start on the right-hand side. And we saw Lovera come on for Masouras. And that last change from Olympiakos was pivotal because it did see Valbuena shift out to the right-hand side, and that was a key component to Arsenal's winner because you have Valbuena down that right-hand side, but he's not renowned for doing defensive duties in those zones. So it allows space for Saka to push forward like he was doing regardless, and unfortunately for Olympiakos, he did make them pay. Because when you look to the build-up to the goal, you have Fortounis sitting on Guendouzi dropping off a bit deeper, but you did have Mustafi pushing forward towards half until Guilherme was looking to approach him. We end up seeing Mustafi play a long diagonal ball over Elabdellaoui for Aubameyang, and Aubameyang's able to control that ball, and as he looks to cut in, he locates Saka running off Valbuena. The ball is poked into Saka, and when we have Ruben Semedo looking to come across, Saka is able to play a low cross beyond those two center backs for Lacazette, finally breaking into the 6-yard box and attacking the cross and directing his effort into the net. That's a wonderful goal created by Arsenal, and it epitomizes what Arteta wanted from his attacking structure. You end up having Aubameyang pulling out the fullback. Mustafi was pushing forward and exploiting the defensive shift that Olympiakos made. And you had Saka bypassing Valbuena to link play with Lacazette, who finally made the most of a chance created in and around that 6-yard box. Arsenal should have doubled their lead on the counterattack shortly after that, and we also saw Socrates hit the crossbar. But when you break down that game as a whole, Arsenal's attacking structure did encounter some issues against Olympiakos' high press, but besides that high press and a brief spell of dominance from Valbuena, Arsenal got into the better positions in that game. They were able to shift Olympiakos' defensive approach and force them to play in a 4-5-1. They got Lacazette into good positions, although it was through transition. But once that press did die down, they were able to exert their dominance. And the one issue that they had is that when they were able to break in transition, they lacked that final pass, and Lacazette's finishing was poor. But as that game continued and Arteta looked to shift the personnel, he was able to get that advantage that he wanted with Saka pushing forward, and they were able to exploit Valbuena's lack of defensive discipline like Olympiakos did to Aubameyang in the the first half, and this was a worthy win by the Gunners, who are now favorites to advance to the round of 16. But let me know what you guys think. What changes should Arteta make in that second leg? And do you think Olympiakos can overcome this deficit? Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget I upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And once again, if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And that was your daily dose of the interviews.